Welcome to this presentation. My name is Jerry Rudman. I'm one of the Psi Beta students who is helping to present a set of lessons in support of the introductory psychology teachers at Irvine Valley College. The title of this lesson is Distracted Driving, and I think that people need to understand that cognitive limitations make it unsafe to both talk and drive. One goal of psychology is to conduct controlled experiments that let us understand the effects of something on an outcome. In this lesson, we're going to be looking at how the science of psychology has investigated driving and the use of cell phones. So let's start out right away with a video from the National Transportation and Safety Board.
I wish there were enough words to describe my parents. They were both just the most wonderful people. You know, every week they were at the soup kitchen helping to feed the underprivileged and always helping other people. But you know, my mom was the cool 8th grade English teacher. Anytime I'm home, my neighbors always say they just don't know what to do, that anytime they needed a lawnmower fixed or a new well dug or their shutters painted, just absolutely everything. And my dad was always just could not say no and helped everyone he could help. The date was May 18th of 2008. It was my college graduation day. And, you know, my parents and I were just driving this really easy drive that we'd done so many times, but because of a young driver talking on his cell phone while he was driving, he caused a 3-vehicle collision that ended the lives of both my parents and ended all hopes of the life I had been planning. And there happened to be a paramedic who lived right on the scene. He heard the crash and came to see if everyone was okay. When he got there, my mom didn't even have a heartbeat. My dad had a really faint heartbeat, but it faded almost right away. And when he came to me, I had a really strong pulse, but I wasn't breathing. So he moved my head and I took a gasp for air. We were literally around the corner from an ambulance station and less than 10 minutes from a trauma hospital. My life has changed in every way imaginable. Not only with my parents being gone, but, you know, just being in this entirely new body. Broken bones heal, but, you know, a brain injury is forever, and that, amazingly, I lost not too much cognitive ability.
She started off on the brink of death, you know, a 10% chance of surviving, and it was 2 weeks before she even really started waking up, giving the occasional thumbs up. It was 3 months before she even really knew who I was. It was about a month and a half after the accident. She was the first time she asked where her parents were. Her brother told her, and she thought it was a joke. And even so, she didn't remember the next day. And she probably asked about her parents specifically 36 times over the course of 2 months before it really stuck in. And for us and for her family, it was heartbreaking every time.
The left side of my body doesn't really, this is what my arm can do. I can't move my wrist, I can't move my fingers, I can't move my ankle, I can't move my toes. It's just so difficult that I can't really function as a normal human being. That's the things I used to love to do, I can't do anymore. You know, I was an outdoors girl. There's no more hiking, there's no more biking, there's no more throwing a baseball around, there's no more canoeing, there's no more camping. Those were my absolute favorite things to do.
Kelsey was a beautiful young lady. She was in Palms, she liked to dance, she loved hanging out with her twin sister. She always said she didn't have any friends, but we found that not to be true. After she had passed away by over 1,000 people at her funeral and wake. Even at 17, she would want to hug and snuggle with me, and she just had a huge, huge heart.
She was a very fun-loving kid. She was always cracking jokes and laughing at everything I said. She loved to play jokes on me as well, and I think especially me. She was always leaving me notes. Dad, love you, I was here. As a matter of fact, we found one note months after she died in our car, and in the glove box was a note she had written. Said, Dad, I know you're going to clean the car and find this note. and just funny things like that all the time. We would find that she would leave.
It was January 24th, 2010 at 3:37 in the afternoon. The phone had rang, and it was Kelsey's best friend, Stacy, on the other end. And Stacy said that Kelsey had been in a accident. We went down to the crash site, and it was bad. Kelsey was in the car. She was T-boned by an SUV, and the SUV was only doing 35 miles an hour. I found out a few days after that Kelsey had been on the phone.
It's a cliche to say it was surreal, but I think from the call on for who knows how long, we were just shocked in a daze, and some days I think we still are.
Focus Driven in its simplest terms is essentially the Mothers Against Drunk Driving on today's cell-infested roads. And we're just doing our best to get legislation passed, to reach out to families who have lost loved ones and help them find a place to mourn the loss of their loved ones.
People don't realize that when you're having a conversation on the phone, that you are trying to drive at the same time and talk at the same time, and your brain cognitively cannot do both tasks, and so the talking on the phone takes over and you are not seeing the road. I believe that it's much more than just the law. The education has to be there as well to get people to realize how dangerous that this act is.
What it really needs to come down to, it needs to go beyond the laws. It needs to be the cultural change. It needs to be the peer pressure from the passenger sitting in the other seat. It needs to be the person picking up with the phone on the other end saying, I can't talk to you if you're driving the car. It needs to be absolutely everyone stepping up and trying to put an end to this epidemic.
So let's take a look at some of the research that's been done by psychology on distracted driving. First of all, it is a cognitive issue, not a motor issue. That's important. If it was a matter of not being able to physically control the steering wheel while holding an object, well then hands-free devices would solve the problem. But it's a cognitive issue because talking while driving is the problem, even if you're not holding the phone. We know this because of experimental data. Now, research in psychology has looked at this, and this is one way that psychological research can both inform and help society. So here's an early study that was done, which is what's called a correlational study, and it compares vehicle deaths per 100,000 in the population. This is probably national data. I'm not positive about that. And this the mobile phone subscriptions per 100,000 in the population. So it could be state by state data. So once you plot all of that out, you see that doesn't seem to be any kind of a correlation. If there was a positive correlation, you'd probably expect to see these dots go up. But instead, if there's either no correlation or if anything, it sort of suggests that mobile phone subscriptions per 100,000, the more people get phones, the less accidents occur that cause death. However, there's a lot of things in a correlational study that could explain this that are kind of buried under the surface that could obscure the real pattern. It could be, for example, that during this period of research, the safety of the vehicles was increased. So although people were getting in wrecks, fewer were dying. So that's something to consider. I'm going to do a little pivot here and talk about something that you'll see is related to what we've just been discussing, but it sort of sets the stage for the difference between correlational and experimental research. So, a man by the name of Kingsbury published an article in the Huffington Post. He thought he found a causal relation between early childhood education and crime. His main conclusion: we're taking children away from their mothers too soon. I guess he thought that if kids were going to kindergarten, they were being in some way damaged and were more likely eventually to get into crime, and that raised the crime rate in the area. Well, that's one interpretation, at least. His sources, he said, I went to the Department of Education, I got a list of kindergartens, and I went to also the related safety department and got the crime report. In general, towns with a kindergarten had 400% more crime than towns in the same county. And so his conclusion, of course, was that kindergartens somehow cause the crime rate to increase. Can you think of any other explanation for Kingsbury's conclusion that towns with kindergartens are more likely to have crime? So this gets us into the topic of what's called spurious correlations. This is where variables vary together, but it seems silly sometimes to conclude that one could possibly have caused the other. Let's take a look at just 3 of these that came from this website called Spurious Correlations. When you have a moment, you might want to, not now, but sometime with Google, just Google Spurious Correlations and pull up this website and see some of them are unbelievable correlations. So this plots capital cheese consumption. You see over here in red, and this line is red here, how much cheese is consumed, and over here, over time, and on this axis, you see the number of people who died by getting tangled in bed sheets. Now, this could be infants, or it could be maybe older senior citizens that are demented or something. But whatever the case, that's quite a remarkable correlation. As one went up, so did the other. Here's another one. People who drowned after falling out of a fishing boat. You can see right here, all the way up to 20 deaths in a period, and this is in red. So if you go here, like in 2000, there were maybe 18 that drowned while in a fishing boat. It is dropping over time, which is nice. Maybe people are not falling out or drowning as much, getting swimming lessons. Who knows? Over here is the marriage rate in Kentucky. So as the marriage rate in Kentucky dropped over the years, so did the number of people who drowned after falling out. So this does sort of imply some sort of relationship, but I'm sure it's spurious, not a true relationship. And the final graph here shows drivers killed in a collision with a railroad train. And over here is the number of barrels of crude oil sent to the United States from Norway over time. And you see that this is in red, so over time we became less and less dependent on Norway for crude oil shipments, but also drivers killed in collisions with a railway train dropped accordingly. So these are spurious correlations and are interesting. Let's go back to this graph again and show that there's a lot of uncontrolled variables in this type of correlational study that can lead people to miss relevant associations. Although it looks like there's a zero correlation between the number of cell phone subscriptions and vehicle deaths, this is evidence that cell phones are not causes of more serious crashes, but there could be other factors that obscure that actual pattern hidden in the graph. And experimental studies can tease these factors out. So the limits of correlational studies is that it's impossible to show any conclusion that something about cell phone use causes the accidents to occur. In an experimental study, you can isolate one aspect of a cell phone use and use the experimental method to assess the causal impact on driving. So that's a nice thing that we have. So we're going to go into an interactive right here. First of all, we want to know what are some confounding variables that a researcher needs to consider when examining correlations between cell phone use and driving accidents. A confounding variable is one that influences driving outside of the effect of using a phone. So it could be, for example, that younger drivers are less experienced and more accident prone in general. The amount of traffic. Heavy traffic requires greater attention to driving. So that's another one. And then there are maybe police are or are not strictly enforcing cell phone use when driving. They're not supposed to in California to text while driving or speak on a phone. But I don't know how strong that's enforced here. It may be enforced in other states or counties. The thing is these are all variables that could affect the data. So we have a closing interactive here, and in this interactive, students will be reading an article that they download and read. It's a 2-page article that summarizes a study. They will be instructed on what is the independent variable in the experiment and what's a dependent variable, and the idea of randomly assigning participants to different conditions. They will then be asked that based on the study, do they think that researchers could conclude that a change in the IV caused a change in the DV? Okay. So the lesson will then close, and then I'm going to do a review here of some of the concepts that just happened in the interactive work that you just did, ladies and gentlemen. So first of all, just to go back to this chart shows that when the participant was in a driving simulator having a conversation, they didn't seem to make any mistakes. They scored 100%. And over here, while having a cell phone conversation, their performance dropped off on the driving simulator. This table sort of summarizes the different variables that were examined in this study. For example, and these are some statistical symbols that we will look at in the future. I just want to introduce these today in lesson 1. NS means not significant, but when you get this symbol, it means that the study, the conclusion statistically was the results were not due to chance. Same thing down here. So what does that mean? Well, it means that while in the driving simulator and talking to a person on the phone, the person who was driving added a distance between the car in front of him or her. And I think you do maybe see that sometimes where people are texting or talking on a phone and they're kind of like, slowing down traffic because they're not paying attention. Here's another one, the amount of lane deviation. So sometimes you see people driving along and they're like going over to the edge of the lane and then over to the edge of the lane. In the cell phone conversation, that was supported, that did happen more often in the study, so that was concluded to be a significant finding. So the basic conclusion that we can have here is that there's a benefit to experimental studies. And the reason is that you can isolate one aspect of a cell phone use and use the experimental method to assess causal impact on driving. In a true experiment, the independent variable is manipulated and participants are randomly assigned to groups. So just a couple of closing key points I want to leave you with. It is impossible to show conclusively that something about cell phone use causes the accident if you're doing just a correlational study. You cannot conclude anything in a correlational study. All you can find out is two things vary, and one may cause the other. But in an experimental study, you can isolate one aspect of cell phone use and use the experimental method to assess the causal impact on driving. In a true experiment, the independent variable is manipulated and participants are randomly assigned to groups. So Here finally are the references that back up and where we got the data for this. I hope you enjoyed lesson 1 and got something out of it. Lesson 2 will be coming along in a week or two, and your instructor will let you know how you can access it and the period of time that you have to do that. Thank you very much for your attention.